Hi, everybody. This is Dr. Keesha Ewers. Last night we had some technical difficulties when I was interviewing Dr. Ben Lynch. I'm so excited to bring this interview to you. I want to introduce him because he is one of my heroes in this whole world of the genetic explosion of science that we're going through right now. It's such an amazing way for us to be able to really dial in our health. So without further ado, Dr. Ben Lynch received his cell and molecular biology BS from the University of Washington and his MD from Bastyr University. His passion for identifying the cause of disease directed him towards nutrigenomics and methylation dysfunction. Currently, he researches, writes, and presents worldwide on the topic of MTHFR and methylation defects. He's the author of Dirty Genes. You can learn more about Dr. Lynch and his work at drbenlynch.com. He's also the president and founder of SeekingHealth.com, which is a company that's oriented towards disease prevention and health promotion. He lives in Seattle, in my hometown here, with his wife Nadia and 3 boys, Tasman, Matthew, and Theodore. So, bringing you Dr. Ben Lynch. The first question that I asked him was to just set the foundation for what is a SNP, a single nucleotide polymorphism. We hear so much about these. This is what Dr. Ben has been writing about in Dirty Genes and talking about for years. And for anyone that's new to this world of genetics and nutrigenomics, I just ask him to define and start with the foundation of what a SNP is. Here you go.
What people want to really know about a SNP is that it can alter the function of your genes a bit. So a SNP is like, like the word two. It sounds the same, but it has slightly different function in your senses. And if you don't know all the slightly different functions, and you might get it wrong on a test, but you can still get away with saying it, and people will get it. And you can even write it incorrectly, and you'll catch that someone made a mistake, but you're like, it's fine. So a SNP is kind of like that, where the gene is still functioning, but it's not functioning at its fullest potential, or it's functioning at a different potential. And so it's altering its speed, basically, or altering its shape. And anytime you alter a gene shape, or an enzyme shape, because genes make enzymes usually, then that shape change causes a functional change. And so a SNP can typically speed up a gene, or it can slow it down. A lot of people always think that, I have a SNP and it's going to make my genes slower or worse. But sometimes a SNP can actually make them go faster. And so it's not always, a direct correlation. And we always have a mindset too that SNPs are bad, and they're all bad. If we see plus on the genetic report, it's bad. How do I fix that? And if we've inherited it, some SNPs are bad, but the SNPs that most of us talk about in medicine are not really that bad. They were selected for a reason, and not many people talk about that. But in our current environment, with our current exposures, our current grinding and lack of community and lights and working when it's dark instead of sleeping, these SNPs that we've inherited from our ancestors who did not have any of this, 1,000 years ago, are now playing a role in our life more significantly and do contribute to disease.
I love, you taught me this a long time ago, is never treat the gene, never treat, just the one isolated thing. And actually in functional medicine, we think about that anyway. We're a full contextual human being that Ayurvedic medicine talked about 10,000 years ago as us being not just our physical body, but energy, emotions, mental, spiritual, and that we actually get access to that higher self if we're not toxic in all those other layers. I now use genetics as one of the tools to help people have access to that, where we get the epiphanies and the wisdom, the collective unconscious, that we can actually get bogged down in some of these SNPs and think that, just like you would with Lyme disease or any other kind of Epstein-Barr virus, when someone brings into my office a whole blog report about this and said, this is what's going on with me, and it's just the one thing. And I think that, it's really important what you just said about really making sure that you don't isolate this one thing as your whole life problem. And I see that. I'm sure you do too.
Huh. I see it way more than I want to. Yeah. And that's one of the reasons why I wrote Dirty Genes, was to try to put it to bed. Mm-hmm. And it's a big undertaking. And I will say that I tried that. And I tried fixing people's MTHFR by giving them methylfolate in the beginning. I tried fixing my own, and I gave myself a splitting headache for days while trying. And it's like, well, I have MTHFR. Aren't I supposed to take methylfolate? Well, no, a lot of us have MTHFR, and some of us need it, and some of us, need the supplementation. And some of us get adequate folate from our foods, and some of us aren't putting such a huge load on it. I don't drink alcohol. So I'm not pounding it. Now if I'm at a conference and I'm working hard, then I'll take methylfolate, but I'm not taking methylfolate because of my MTHFR problem. I'm taking methylfolate so I can improve my function of my brain for long periods of time. So yeah, this singular gene with a singular intervention, or a singular, a singular symptom, right? Mm-hmm. Everything that we are taught nowadays, and the TV doesn't help, and the magazines don't help, and our doctors don't help. Docs, I have reflux. Oh, take this antacid.
Right.
Doc, I have a histamine problem. Take this antihistamine. Doc, I have an infection. Take an antibiotic. So how do we take an anti-SNP? So it's just how we're ingrained, and you can't really blame anyone, because that's how doctors are taught, and that's how people are taught, and pharmaceuticals companies love it, and supplement companies love it, because it sells, but it doesn't fix.
Right. Match symptom to drug, or match supplement to symptom.
Right.
And I was in Peru in the jungle, and my methyl B melted. And I remember pouring it out of my little pill container going, well, I'm not going to be having that for a couple of weeks. And noticing the difference. I did the same exact thing. Noticing the difference of not taking it, and then going, oh, so sometimes I do need this and sometimes I don't. And I think we all have to arrive to that on our own by really tuning into our bodies. One of the things that I think really makes it impossible for people to tune into their bodies is adverse childhood experiences or trauma. And we know that there's capital T trauma and there's lowercase t trauma. And the capital T trauma is the stuff that was studied in the adverse childhood experiences study between 1995 and 1997 by the CDC and Kaiser Permanente. And that's the trauma that's the sexual abuse, emotional, physical, and then neglect. And those are the ones where the wise mind of the child, in order not to dissociate, really learns to leave their body. They learn not to be in touch with their bodies if what's happening to their bodies is really, really awful. So then we have adults, and I see this in my practice, that are just completely brains carrying bodies around behind them, kind of like dragging them around by the head, And when we do that, it doesn't matter what kind of supplements you take, you're not going to really heal. You're not going to get balanced. You really do have to get in touch with whatever your body's telling you. So what you're saying is, listen up, right? Listen up to what your body is actually trying to communicate. And oftentimes we wait for the body to turn the volume up so high that it's screaming, and now we have a disease. Mm-hmm. So with adverse childhood experiences, those impact genetics and how they manifest. I would love to have you talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's, I'm glad you brought this up, because, the more I focused on SNPs and the more I focused on genetics, the more I really, you stare at biochemical pathways a lot, right? And with what I do, and when you keep seeing stress in there, like mental stress or physical stress or chemical stress, it's still stress.
Right.
And so it typically comes back to that. If there's a stressor, then the genes respond. No, actually they react. They don't respond, they react. And so when you have a adverse event, they react and they deplete resources, because the genes are working triple time, triple speed to try to get you out of that situation. And anytime you over accelerate, you deplete resources. And if you're in an environment that's of that's adverse, then you're not going to be getting the resources back, right? Mm-hmm. It's like clear cutting a forest, or it's like over accelerating in your car and you're just using up all the gas and there's no gas station around. So an adverse childhood event is just depleting this kid of resources to help them grow and nurture and allow their genes to function at their optimal, even not even optimally, just function. Okay. So now their guts are wrecked because they need genes to heal their gut. They need genes for growth. They need genes to be able to think and perform in school. And then they're not performing in school. Now they're getting bad grades. And now they see the F's on their paper. And now they're even thinking more and more. And their guts are reacting. Now they're reacting to food. And now they have issues with that. And they're embarrassed because they're gas and bloating, all day. And they stink. And so it just keeps getting notched down deeper and deeper and deeper. And so then you say, okay, well, let's just give them vitamin and minerals like you said, but that emotional trauma is so ingrained that it's probably even unconscious. I'm no expert in this, but I have seen some crazy things with cranial sacral treatment and massage where the practitioner was working with the patient over a certain tissue or a muscle, and the patient's just laying there. And they do cranial sacral over a certain part of the body. And I mean, I'm not making this stuff up. The patient just started bawling. And when I saw that, I was like, what the heck? I mean, they're like half asleep, totally relaxed. You can see that when people are getting massage. And they were just sobbing. And I was like, oh, you have emotions stored. I was watching the practitioner do this. Oh, they have, emotions stored here. I was like, I still can't explain it. I'm not even going to try to explain it. And some things don't even need explanation. But this whole adverse childhood impacts on the genes, that's just when the child is born and then going through life, right, with those. So I'm really happy that you're doing that. But should we hit also the adverse effects before the child is born? Mm-hmm. Because, you look at translational epigenetics, and what that is the mother is in an environment where her pregnancy the environment is influencing her pregnancy. Let's say that. So, for example, in many years ago, England or Ireland had a famine. Okay. And women were pregnant during this famine, and they were starving themselves, and they had a baby in their womb. And as a result, the baby's starving. So what happens is there's a gene switch that turned on these thrifty genes, which then the babies were born. So they would survive in the womb, right? So they were sustaining on very little calories and lived. So now we're born into an environment with low calories, and they were doing fine. And then these people these children are now growing up, and now the famine's over. And now they have kids. But when these kids are growing up, they have these thrifty genes, and now they're getting obese. Right. They're overweight. Well, they're not eating that much, but their genes are programmed to hold on to the nutrients. Now let's go to a war zone. Okay? So now you go to a war zone, and a woman is pregnant in a war zone. Let's just, I'm not going to pick any countries, but just say, someone is living in a war zone and she's pregnant, and the baby is listening to all these bombs going off and is hyper aware of sounds and bombs. Well, why? Well, for protection. So now the baby is delivered in this environment and is acutely aware of bombs and missiles and to react to these things. So now they go through life hyper responsive to these stimuli. And so even in the womb, the babies and the children are being influenced by these adverse events genetically, epigenetically. Yeah. So then you tack on other adverse effects. I mean, war zone is bad enough. Now the kid is not only epigenetically increasing their awareness of bombs and missiles and being alert to protect themselves and to live, but now they're also seeing it firsthand, which is even more trauma.
So this exactly happened with me. I have a moral reflex still that's quite intact. Thank you very much. So for our listeners that don't know what that is, I have a startle reflex just like an infant still. A Babinski that goes with it too. It's so interesting. I've had neurologists evaluate me and say, why is this here? And I came to the conclusion on my own before I knew about all of this that I grew up on naval air stations where fighter jets were always breaking the sound barrier and rattling the windows in our home. And my mother was pregnant during that time too. And I startle to loud noises like nobody's business. You know, I just jump and I can't help it. I will never in this lifetime be able to kick that. And I know that, and it's okay. You know, and this is really interesting because this is part of what I talk about in reversing autoimmune disease too, is you're not a victim of your genetics or your adverse childhood events. I was sexually abused when I was 10 and by the vice principal in my elementary school. And rheumatoid arthritis 20 years later, just like the ACEs study showed, 20 years later, like ping, like I had a turkey timer in me, I get diagnosed with an autoimmune disease that my grandfather had. And within 6 months, by really getting underneath all of this, was able to shut it off. And I haven't had it for 23 years. So I think that this is really powerful, this piece. And I really am so happy that we're talking about it and that you've written this book to talk about that you don't just treat this one gene. I mean, there are support groups all over the internet for 1298 or 677 MTHFR, you know, and I just think that people really want to stay in that space of matching symptom to supplement or dietary protocol and not really understand that this piece around hypervigilance, you know, I always say a hypervigilant immune system is a result of a hypervigilant mind. Just like you said, as a child, if you have got that fight or flight already turned on, it does store in the body. And we have research that shows that over and over again about how the body keeps the score. And we have so much research behind this. And the body does keep it, like you said, with craniosacral. I've seen that so many times myself, and it is explainable. So we have to not leave this part behind. And I think that it's such a vital part for people to understand that you don't have to react genetically, if this is a component, because lowercase t trauma, Moll did a study that showed that the brain damage that happens with someone with PTSD, the prefrontal cortex damage that we see on PET scans, actually occurs in people that report chronic daily stress. Their perception of stress is overwhelm. I can't even tell you how many of my patients, probably 100%, say they're overwhelmed, right?
Yes.
Constantly overwhelmed. And I'm thinking, okay, this is brain damage. We've seen this on PET scans, right? Your perception of your stress, you and I are Tasmanian devils, but we're excited about it because we know we're living our life of mission and purpose. Mm-hmm. And so if you can just reframe whatever your stressor is to purpose-driven life, then you don't feel overwhelmed. That is actually going to react differently. Your genetics are going to react differently. It's so fascinating to me.
It is. It is really all about perception, and we have a choice. Mm-hmm. And for example, my youngest son is on a basketball team, and they're trash. I mean, they're half the kids are athletically challenged. A quarter of them have apparently some, they're either over medicated or something. They're not right. And it's a shame, but they're trying hard. They're trying hard. And my son is athletic and he works hard and he wants to be on a winning team. And so he faked that he was hurt the first game, so he couldn't be put in. And I'm assistant coach, and I saw him doing this. And so I pulled him to the side, and I said, "Hey, Theo," I said, "it's not about winning, bud." I said, you have two ways to look at this. You can look at this and say your team stinks, and you're embarrassed. Or you can get out there and be a leader and support your team and do the best that you can for your team and for yourself, and prove that, even that you guys are weak, you still try hard, no matter the odds. Mm-hmm. So you can either give up or you can push through it and try to learn from the experience. And he went in and he played his heart out, and they actually won the game. It was amazing. And so, you know, there's always two choices. And the kids, they complain about their chores. I said, the chore's there. So you're going to do it with a smile, or you're going to do it being all irritated. So you still have to do it. So,
but your body's going to react differently depending on which of those ones that you choose.
Yeah.
Which is the whole thing. You know, my daughter at the age of 9 started showing signs of having gut issues, you know, little genetics coming down the pike. And, you know, she was having the same issue. I can't eat the same thing as all my friends. You know, I hear adults saying the same thing. I can't eat the same as everyone else. And so I have a hard time sticking to this. And, you know, when she was 9, I sat her down and I said the exact same thing. You can either be a leader and, you know, open your lunch and tell people what you're eating and why, or you can be a victim. And, you know, the choice is absolutely yours. I'm not with you. It's all you. And she actually started being a leader, and she started bringing food to her sleepovers, and the mothers of the kids were saying, now that looks really good. How did you make that? She now caters. She's 20 years old, right? Cool. She caters for people with food sensitivities and dietary protocols that have a hard time getting underneath it. She taught all the friends' mothers. She taught her friends how to eat this way. All her friends eat healthy. You know, they're all very healthy kids and very wholesome. And it's because this little 9-year-old stepped up. And so I tell that story to my patients. You know, you really can do this with a different attitude, right?
Right.
And it actually impacts how your genetics show up too.
Big time.
Yeah.
Big time.
Yeah, so let's talk about some of those genes and how, you know, like I always call it a gratitude attitude. Not having a gratitude attitude will infect them.
Yeah, I love that gratitude attitude. That's cool. I was working with a life coach for a while, and it's like, God, you know, if the only thing I could teach my kids would be gratitude, because everything else would fall into place.
Yeah,
it's like the only thing, if I could instill them to be grateful, then my job is done.
I know.
And it's a hard thing in this instant gratification world. So, you know, and there are genes which increase your desire to have instant gratification. And there's genes which allow you to be okay with it. You know, you don't need to have instant gratification. And if you go back to dopamine, I mean, the infamous dopamine neurotransmitter, and I'm sure there's others too, but we like to single things out. So we'll single this one out. But dopamine is like the neurotransmitter that we all really want and crave. And there are genes which will take our dopamine and keep it there longer. And there's another gene, it's the same gene, but it'll process it differently and it'll move it out faster. It's the same gene. Mm-hmm. So if an individual has a SNP in the COMT gene, like catechol O-methyltransferase, it doesn't matter what it is. You can just say SHU. It doesn't matter what this name is, just COMT. Its job is to process dopamine along with some other things. Well, let's just stay on dopamine. If the gene is slow, then you're susceptible to having your dopamine levels higher. I didn't say you're guaranteed. I said it's susceptible to that. Right. Now you could have a COMT that's intermediate speed, and you just kind of average levels, possibly, of your dopamine. And then there's a faster COMT, which could possibly move it through faster. Now, it doesn't define that's how your dopamine levels are. It just shows you that you have this gene that's what it does. But your lifestyle choices will impact it. So an individual who has a slower COMT tends to have higher dopamine levels, possibly. And with higher dopamine levels, you don't need that instant gratification. You don't need the alcohol. You don't need the addictions. You don't need your phone as much. You tend to be type A, driven, focused, getting stuff done. And you might have glowing skin. And people will comment on that. And like, wow, your skin is so beautiful. And God, you get so much work done. But boy, and then what happens is people start seeing you burning out. And it's like, God, you're just grinding and you never stop. And then you start getting irritable and snapping and you struggle with insomnia. And that time of the month comes around and people joke that your PMS is awful, and it's no joke. And, and then you have estrogen sensitive cancers in your family. You've got ovarian, breast, and uterine, and, that's in your family. And you start, and it's like, God, you just described me. Well, this gene is a big player. So that's the slow speed. And the cool thing is you can modulate with your lifestyle choices. So we'll get to that in a second. Now there's a faster component of that gene. So if you have a SNP which alters how that particular gene is made, that gene can work quicker and your dopamine levels tend to be lower. And so you're like this chilled out, relaxed person who just easy-go-lucky. You might tend towards more daredevil things, and you might be the type of person who wants to be a brain surgeon, or you wanted to be a daredevil, or you really perform really well in tests. Whereas the other person with a slow COMT, they're really great at homework and they're super smart in class, but you put a test in front of them, they're not all like, oh yeah, that's not me, I'm not a test taker. It's like, oh yeah, I suck at homework, but you put a test in front of me, I nail it. So these personalities, right? Or you hear a person, oh, I could never be a heart surgeon, that's too much stress. It's like, oh, I thrive on stress and danger, I do well. Well, because that danger and stress increases your dopamine. With a faster COMT, you want that lift. And so that's helpful. But on the flip side, you tend to be depressed, and you tends to addiction of any type, whether it's sex or alcohol or smoking or shopping or video games or social media. You have to have that little dopamine hit often, and or high caloric dense foods. So this one particular gene is such a big player. And what's really cool is when you find out you have it, or you find out if you find out you have it, you can modify how it's working. Or let's say you find out that you swore you were a slower COMT, you swore that your dopamine levels were genetically influenced by this one gene, but you took a quiz or you took a genetic test and you found that you're actually faster, not slower. Well, how in the heck does that happen? Dr. Lynch is wrong. No, your body has adjusted by your own actions. Either you've slowed it down by your own actions, or it's gotten dirty from other way. Maybe it's lacking methylation, or like you're deficient magnesium, or eating massive amounts of protein. So they're really modifiable, which is really neat.
Yeah, I was slow, marathon runner, and eating tons of sugar, which altered how it expressed, and my skin wasn't glowing. I had acne. It was like It's messed up everything, right? So, that carb loading thing. So, it was really interesting when I found out about my genetics, and this is what's going on. We don't just have this addictive personality problem in in my lineage. We actually have a problem with this, how we are expressing this COMT issue and how our dopamine levels then remain. And that makes it so much easier to manage with it. So much easier. So it's like getting a little bit of knowledge can be harmful, but in this case, I think it's so good, because then you get to tune into you and say, gosh, if I eat this, how do I feel? You do a pulse test. Yeah. Ayurveda did pulse diagnosis a long time ago, and you can check it out. I'd love for you to say that, to tell a little bit about that, because you can check in with yourself as you go, including on how much you're taking for supplementation, what you're eating, what kind of music you're listening to, how you're communicating with your partner, and if what's that's doing to your fight or flight. Do you need to take some communication skills? All of these things actually are testable. Just right in the moment.
They are. And, there was a play that my wife wanted of us all to go to. And then it was a high school play. And, the high schoolers are actually pretty good. And so I went to one play where there was a comedy musical, and it was really fun, and kids liked it. And then another one came up, and she was like, well, let's go to this one. And so she found out that I said, what's it about? And because I'm kind of picky on these things, and she goes, well, it's not a musical. It's actually kind of gloomy. It's a murder. I said, well, no, count me out. I said, I don't need that right now. In fact, I don't need it ever.
Yeah.
And I don't want to watch a play about murder, and I don't want the kids either. So she went, And she came back, and the next day she was kind of gloomy, and I said, "What's up?" She goes, "That play really put me in a funk." And I said, "What happened?" She goes, "Well, it was a murder." Yeah. She goes, "But it just didn't end well either. It just was flat out depressing. It was awful." And it affected her next day, and it probably even affected her following day after that. And so, it's and I know that, and I did not want to be seeing that, because I knew it affected me too. When I saw the movie Wonder, which is great. Have you seen Wonder?
Yes.
Oh my God, it's such a good movie. I probably cried 30 times. But it's uplifting. You're crying of joy, and you're crying of, that's so cool, and it was a great story. So that I'll watch any day. But murder and violence and horror, no, I don't need that. I don't need that. And my oldest son has a faster COMT, and he likes horror movies. He loves them, actually. And so I did a survey once on my genetic reporting Facebook group, and I asked him, I said, are you a fast COMT, and do you love horror movies? But I asked it if they were genetically, because they have their genetic results, right? Fast COMT is COMT minus. And they're like, "Oh, I'm COMT minus. And yeah, I love horror. And no, yeah, I'm COMT, but I hate horror. Can't stand it." But I didn't ask about the expression, right? So, because that horror, it just amps you up, and it hits you in your dopamine flood, right? So interesting. It's interesting stuff.
That is fascinating, because I'm also very impressionable. I won't watch any of that. So we were just talking about this in my family a couple of days ago, and they have a rating. My kids, I have 4 children, and they're grown now, 20 to 29, and they have a rating. It's either a mom movie or it's not a mom movie. And they know. It's like, Mulan, that's a mom movie. They just know I won't watch that stuff. And I guess I had no idea that it had anything to do with dopamine levels, but I will hold on to those images. I watched The Exorcist in college. It was the stupidest thing I ever did, and it was the last horror movie I've ever watched in my life. And I can still bring it up, a thought. So you can hold on to that stuff, and it does impact you. So interesting that it has this genetic tie-in.
Yeah, it's just because you look at the research, and you read the research on addictive behaviors and the lower dopamine, and smoking and alcohol and caloric-dense foods all increase dopamine, and sex increases dopamine, and gambling increases dopamine, shopping increases dopamine. And my oldest son, he loves horror. He loves shopping. He's a boy. He loves shopping. He loves fashion. He loves sports. He loves video games. He loves big social groups.
I hate all of that. So that's so fascinating.
I'm the same. I can't stand any of it. And then I kept trying to put my stuff on him.
Right.
But I finally learned that no, he's Tasman, and that's him. That's what he likes. So let him be who he is. And then my middle boy, his genetics are very similar to mine. He likes small groups. He's introverted. He doesn't have that addictive behavior towards shopping or lack of focus. Oh yeah, and I forgot, the oldest would have focusing issues because he wasn't eating protein. He, that fast COMT, he wanted the caloric dense foods. He wanted the candy and the sugar and that hit, but that's also a fast serotonin. So I put him on tyrosine, and it really calmed him down, and it increased his focus. Now, if I gave tyrosine to Matthew, he'd turn into a freaking rage monster. And so would I. But Tasman, it just calms him right down and increases his focus. So I talk about that in the book and give those stories as well. But it is very interesting. This is a really big one. Personalities, we all wonder why we're so driven, or go-getters, or bad test takers, or susceptible to depression, or or can't stand horror, or love horror. And we can't dial it all down to this one gene, of course, and that's pretty reductionist. But it's pretty fun when it does relate, and it does work out that way, because you can figure out a real piece to your puzzle and modify it immensely. So Tasman, he started eating more protein, and because he's a teenage boy and he wants to gain muscle, so before he didn't care about muscle, so he was just carb loading. Now he wants muscle, so now he's eating protein, but it's getting a double benefit because now that protein turns to dopamine in his brain. So now he doesn't need xyrosine as much anymore.
He's happier.
Yeah, he's happy.
Yeah. All right. So when we talk about reversing damage, in any of these contexts, whether it's emotional, mental, or physical, you're talking about scrubbing the gene, cleaning the gene. How does one do that?
Well, with what you do with the emotional adverse events, I think there's a lot to that, and I think that needs to be a bigger role in medicine. I think there's a lot of adverse events that people hold, and I think that should be a first layer once there's trust with the practitioner. So I hope folks listen and if they try the supplements and they do the labs and they do the heavy metals and they do the infections and they do their gut and they do all the stuff, they do the environment and the carpet removal and all that, but they still aren't where they want to be.
Those are the people who come to see me. They've spent thousands of dollars doing all of that, and they're still not healed.
Yeah.
And I do a deep immersion retreat on trauma release. I mean, I'm a therapist and a medical provider, and I do this deep immersion. I have an online program called You Unbroken. They can do it from their computers at home. They don't have to go in front of anybody, And then I also teach them how, if you can't do this in the program, it's a hard stop. Here's how to shop for a therapist. And it needs to be a trauma release therapist, not a talk therapist. And you need to treat it like shopping for shoes. People will say, I went to therapy, that didn't work for me. Right. But if you go shopping for shoes and you put a pair on and you walk down the hall and you say, ooh, they're tight and they pinch and I don't like the color and they make me look ugly, then you get another pair, you try them on and you do it again. You never say shoes don't work, And so I'm always telling people, please shop for a therapist the same way you would shop for a pair of shoes, because they're not always going to fit. And this is a big deal. And so you need to develop that trust, just as you're saying. And here's how to do that. So in my book, Solving the Autoimmune Puzzle, I have a gray box too about how to shop for a therapist. So I agree. While I'm waiting for lab data to come back, I'm starting in on that piece. Food and therapy right away. And I don't always call it that. I call it borrowing a brain. So easy. I mean, you can pick out a pattern in a personality for probably genotypes, right? I can do the same thing with a number of things that I'm expert at. It's so much easier to do that for someone else than it is for yourself. Yes, and so I just get to work with them and say, of course you don't know this yet, because it's so much easier to see it in someone else. When you're living in the morass of it, it's much more difficult. So give yourself a break and borrow a brain. It's just borrowing a brain. No shame.
That's a good way to put it. And, I never thought of the trying a pair of shoes analogy. Yeah, that's great, because, you hear about the therapists and shrinks and, psychotherapy and all that and talk it out. But I've always thought that it's sometimes it's just, well, a lot of times it's not going to be effective, because you have to have that energy flowing between two people. Otherwise, it's like two of the same magnetic poles, trying to, it's completely repulsing each other.
And you have to rewire your brain. You have to do the piece of making a synaptic pathway go from the childhood space of the limbic system into your adult brain. And that has been halted, and you don't have a good thoroughfare there if you've got trauma. So it's so important to do the actual rewiring of your brain, and you can talk to your friends, you can talk to your mom, your girlfriend. Don't do talk therapy. So.
Yeah, you've burned that synapse out on purpose.
Yes.
You don't want to access it anymore.
You don't. Yeah.
And and you can do all the lab testing you want. You can do all the genetic testing you want. You can read all the books you want. But, there's a huge amount of the population that could really benefit from this first, because what initiated it all anyway? Yeah. So if you could remove that emotional trauma, first you could identify what that trauma was, revisit it, and do whatever you do to, I don't know even what the words are.
You don't even have to revisit it. That's
Yeah.
what people are afraid of. Do I have to go back in there again, with that monster under the bed, whatever it was? You don't, actually.
Good.
Yeah, you have to find the feeling in your body, and then you get to go see what the meaning and the belief were that you created back then, and then you get an opportunity to reframe it.
Nice.
And it's not scary. I mean, I was afraid the first time I went into therapy, and then after a little while, you're so excited, you want to roll up your sleeves and go, all right, stuff's happening here, and I'm seeing a change in my relationships and my ability to stay on task with something that I really want. I'm not self-sabotaging anymore. I mean, I hear so many women saying that. I'm gung-ho for a while, and then I self-sabotage. Well, that comes from childhood. That's not, and genetics, the way you're manifesting that. So it's an important aspect to not just own and say, oh, this is me. It's say, no, this is a behavior I can actually change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When I've worked with patients, my first questions were not, what's your first complaint? And, my intake forms were a lot of open-ended questions.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what are your goals? And, what excites you in life? And, what do you want to accomplish today's visit? What do you want to accomplish in 6 months? And what do you think made you sick? And so these open-ended questions, they weren't checkboxes.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned a lot from just looking at the answers. If there were 1 to 2 words or some were just skipped, I'm like, okay. And if I got, 20 pages back, I'm like, oh, this is going to be tough.
Yeah.
So
they both tell you a lot.
Yeah, they do. And it was really interesting. And I get more out of talking with the patient or even seeing them than I do any lab.
Yeah.
Any lab. And a lot of the biggest success stories I've ever had with patients had no labs at all. And they had like miraculous recoveries, and they were emotional. They were mental emotional.
Mm-hmm.
And, I share these stories in conferences fairly often, and they're powerful. And I had my own, I was at a high performance conference, of course, because I go more.
Right.
So I want to learn to be even higher performer. So I went there, and Nick Ortner, right, at the tapping studio,
mm-hmm.
Got on stage. I was like, oh, sweet. And I learned about tapping at Bastyr, and I always thought it was kind of hokey, but figured out maybe something to it. So Nick's up there guiding us through tapping and tells us to close our eyes and imagine something that scares us. And so I close my eyes, and I see my book on a shelf. I see with my name, Dr. Ben Lynch on a spine of a book, and it's published, and it scared the crap out of me. It was like, because I don't want to be ridiculed. I'm afraid of negative reviews. I was afraid of, that I'd be wrong, and, maybe all my stuff is full of nonsense, and maybe I'm, whatever, right? So I had all this baggage behind that. So he goes, okay, now open your eyes. And I was like, I already had them open. And so I tapped through it, and I closed my eyes again. He goes, okay, now go back to that same scenario and look again. I was totally cool with it.
Mm.
And it was like once. And he goes, now you can go deeper and deeper and deeper, like same thing, and just go deeper with the same thing, keep revisiting it as deep as you want to go. I was like, I'm good. And 6 months or 8 months later, I had an agent, I had a ghostwriter, and I was working on a manuscript, and I was cranking. And now I'm happy to have a book out. I'm super excited, and yeah, I'll get negative reviews, and I already have a few. I don't care. The book's not for them. The book's for the 70 some other people that are already given it 5-star reviews. It's not for the people who, it's not for everyone. And I got over my baggage of needing acceptance because I'm
approval
from
outside.
I have something that I know is going to benefit a lot of people.
Yeah.
And it's my job to help them, and I will help them. And there's going to be people that, there already have been many times that are against what I do, but I don't care. I mean, I really don't care anymore.
I'm so glad you shared that. People need to hear that. I had the same thing before I published my doctoral dissertation, my work. I had to do some work with it. And then I had to do the same thing before I published my book. And people need to know that. Like, we don't just crank this stuff out.
No.
We have fears too. But the thing is that you recognized it. I mean, I did too. I said, okay, that's not okay. I need to work with that, and moved through instead of just being stuck. And so I'm so glad you shared that, because here you are now. Dirty Genes is the book, and you are going to be helping so many thousands of people. And I appreciate all the work you're up to in the world. And we're out of time, and I just really want to say thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you, and thanks for the invites, and I really appreciate the work that you're doing too, because I tell people, well, I don't tell, I suggest, and I mention many times that the emotional component is so huge. I mean, I had a Facebook Live with a Hashimoto's Facebook group.
Yeah.
And they wanted to know, they had all these genetic questions. Is 1298 associated with Hashimoto's, and does 677 cause this problem? And I spent the majority of the time talking about the mental, emotional component of thyroid dysfunction.
Good for you.
And, it's just where the conversation went. And I just kind of stayed there. Mm-hmm. And, people were kind of blown away, to be honest. I said, I shared some of the science and the biochemistry of the genes, but I said, this is way bigger than just the genes. Mm-hmm. So, thanks for your work too.
Yeah.
Book just came out January 30th, and we ran Amazon. No, I didn't run Amazon out of stock. You all ran Amazon out of stock, and it reached as high as number 4 out of all books on Amazon.
Attaboy.
Yeah, and it's still in the teens today, even though Amazon's out of stock. People are still buying, so that tells me that people are excited. Mm-hmm. They're anxious to be empowered again. The fear around genetics is being dispelled. The confusion and the all that is going away, and people want to know why they have these symptoms. Mm-hmm. They want to know the right way to approach them, and they're getting success.
Yeah,
and I'm so pumped for them.
Well, thank you so much for making sure that you're paving the way for this, because I think a lot of these companies that are springing up are all about looking at genes in isolation of each other.
They are.
And it's driving me bananas. And, I'm just out there saying, no, you can't do that.
Right.
You're a whole being. You can't do that. Right. So I really appreciate your book, because those companies are going to do damage, and it's not good. So
I'll just leave it with this. Because you said, you got to do the whole body. And Dr. Sachin Patel had a great statement. Blood flows everywhere.
It's a great statement.
Your blood flows everywhere.
Yeah. So, All right. Good night, and thank you.
Yeah. Good night. Thank you. Yeah. I'll just leave it with this. Because you said, you got to do the